Welcome to Footnotes on Crime, the place to hear from authoritative voices in true crime about their experiences and creative processes, and where we ask the question, how do we survive? Coming up on episode 6, Jane Hamilton, award-winning crime journalist and author of Hunting Shadows, Peter Tobin, the truth about the serial killer who hid in plain sight. Jane discusses her career in journalism, her publishing journey, and shares her thoughts on the true crime genre.
And what we've done is true crime's always been pretty big. And back in the day it was books or maybe the odd documentary on TV. Now you've got podcasts, you've got videos, YouTube, you've got Netflix. Netflix has made it explode with the Making a Murderer generation. Every crime is now solvable. So what you've got now is armchair detectives. Yeah. And people who think they know the ins and outs of a case.
Only on Footnotes on Crime.
I'm Katie.
And I'm Colin. Trigger warning, this episode refers to topics that some people may find distressing. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. Welcome Jane Hamilton to the podcast. Today we're going to be talking about a lot about her career and her latest book, Peter Tobin, Hunting Shadows, which will be out by the time this goes, but we're very privileged to being able to have a copy ourselves up front that we got the other day there. But thanks for coming and joining us.
Hi guys, thanks for having me on.
Always a pleasure. Friend of the pod, now you're a guest on the pod. Love it. So can we start by talking about your career? It's been a really interesting one. So you started off as a crime journalist, and now you're starting to write books. But can you start a little bit talking about your background in that aspect?
So I started as an evening news reporter in Edinburgh. I was a young mum. I did an English degree and I didn't want to be a teacher. And journalism seemed like the way to go. But I had no idea what it really entailed, when I first started out. And I did some shifts at the evening news as a sub, and I would watch across the room, looking at the reporters diving in and out of the building. Because back then, there was no mobile phones, barely any internet. So, you had to go out, and you were out the office meeting people. And I would watch them all coming in and being all excited and, feeling the buzz in the newsroom when things went. And I thought, I wish I was over there. I'm sitting here, writing headlines and I'm tidying up reporters' copy. So I did a few shifts like that, and I thought, I want to be the other side of the newsroom. I want to be in the thick of it. I went away and I went back to college after uni, and I did a degree in radio broadcasting. And for a while I toyed over, I'd quite like to be a scriptwriter for radio, but I hated it. Absolutely hated it. Wasn't me. I worked with the BBC drama department briefly, very, very briefly, just as a work experience thing, and it was a bit dry and a bit boring, and I just thought and I was still thinking about those journalists buzzing about that newsroom. So anyway, after I did that, I took a chance and I phoned around a few papers, and most of them, like the Nationals, I had no idea, this pea green woman going on to these Nationals saying, can I get a job? And they were quite sort of no. But I phoned the evening news in Edinburgh, and at that time the news editor was a guy who used to be the Daily Record's news editor, Jim Morrison. Legendary in journalism circles. And I don't know, he must have just heard something in my voice that day when I phoned him, and he said, come in for a shift. If you're any good, I'll give you a shift. And I started in the January, and that was me for the next 5 years. I never moved. And obviously I started as a general reporter, just, earning my spurs, learning how to do door knocks, speak to people, interview people. And it was all run-of-the-mill stories, quite literally village vet stuff. And I did have a kind of an idea what I was doing, because for a while I had volunteered at a local free sheet in Edinburgh. So I sort of knew what was involved, but not completely. And, an evening newspaper is great grounding for journalists. It's where we learn how to do the job properly. So it was long hours. I was a young mum, but, I would be in the office at 7 a.m. I would still be there at 9 p.m. And it was, but that was my first. I was there about a year, and then I became the crime reporter.
So that's a lesson, even getting in the door is a lesson in perseverance. And if you don't ask, you don't get, which is the skill you really need to get anywhere in crime writing.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and after that, it's been crime ever since.
Yeah.
I'm coming into my third decade as a crime reporter, and it's like, wow, where's the time gone,
Do you think that the skills that you learned in that first position are the ones that set you up then for the success that you've had?
I don't really think about it like that. I look back on my career, and the evening news was brilliant. It was back in the days where, still we didn't have access to 24/7 news. I remember, 9/11, and we're all standing in the newsroom watching it, and we were having to rely on the info coming from the wires, not the internet, but coming through the actual, the old news wire. And internet was in its very early days then. Not everybody had computers. We didn't have super fast broadband. It I can't remember what it's called. What was it called? Plug-in.
Dial-up.
That's it. Yeah, dial-up.
Sounds
dial-up. Then the mobile phones were old Nokias, so we were still in that, that era where we didn't send picture messages or videos and stuff. So
Snake and Tetris.
yeah. It's crazy, but so when I look back on my career and I think about all the big stories that I've been involved in, 9/11 from onwards, and I don't think of it as being, I'm not one to go, oh, I've been massively successful as a journalist. You do what you have to do, and the big stories of the day. When I look back now and I think, oh my God, how the hell did I do that? Why did I do it? Oh, what was I thinking? And then other times you think, well, I made a difference. So, I helped somebody. And funny enough, one of the stories that I think about is, it's not even a crime story. It was when I was a general reporter at the Evening News, and it was a very early story, and it was a wee boy had died of a heart attack, 4-year-old.
Wow.
And I had to do the door knock on his mum. It was one of my first door knocks. I was nervous, and I probably wasn't great at speaking to people on a door at that point, but somehow I managed it, and I got into the house and I spoke to her. And, I probably wasn't asking the right questions, I was just chatting, and she was telling me, what had happened and, so forth. Anyway, I got back to the office, wrote the story, and they splashed it on the front page, and she sent me a letter telling me that speaking to me had helped her come to terms with her son's death because I wasn't part of her family, and she felt as if she could be more open with me than she had been, because she was trying to, not be too upset, or maybe, didn't want to tell her real feelings. I learned quite an important lesson at that point, and that is that I know that journalists we're seen as the lowest of the low. We get involved in people's lives when they're at their worst, because people want to know what's going on. And we've got to go there right in the, when emotions are heightened and, people are quite angry. And I learned an important lesson that, sometimes when you get in a door and people are speaking to you, it's actually helped them, and on other occasions it's been, you've got ordinary people who, their lives are ordinary, like you and I, we're just ordinary, we're not famous, we're not rich. Nobody, we matter to a few people in our lives. And when a journalist, features a relative maybe in a paper, even if it's been the most awful of circumstances at their past, they'll tell you, for a little while you've made my relative feel like the most important person on the planet.
And I'd say, like, my favorite quality in a person, in anything, in any context, is curiosity. And I think that's the quality that you're bringing into all those examples.
Yep.
But like open curiosity, honest curiosity. And I think you've done that in all your writing, particularly like these latest books. You're bringing the survivor and the victim story to the fore.
Yeah.
Which traditionally hasn't always been done.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're quite an outlier in that sense throughout your career.
Yeah. I mean, we're not counsellors. You do learn how to speak to people, and what not to say, and you learn how to sort of, just I think empathy. I'm quite an empathetic person myself, and I do feel quite deeply. I'm quite good at reading a room, and I can pick up on the slightest change in people's manners, moods, and that's partly because I've got my own disabilities as well. That and that makes my own senses more attuned than most people would be. So you do learn how to, do the job properly. It's not just about getting the facts and writing the story. You've got to deal with people sometimes long term. A lot of the stories that I've worked on, I've dealt with the families of victims for many years. Not just it's not just a one story wonder, a one hit wonder. There was an Edinburgh case that I worked on for 6 years. Sean Woodburn died in Leith in 2017, into 2017. Sean died, and, I campaigned with his dad for 6 years to get laws changed on multiple postmortems on homicide victims, which we managed to do. We managed to secure a victims commissioner for Scotland, and it's still not in place yet, so that would be good to see some progress on that. But, the Scottish Government has committed to both these things. Journalism can be a force for good. It's not just about gossip or, celebrity stuff. I'm not really one for all that, but sometimes I've used crime journalism isn't just about gangland. It's not just about, local thieves or housebreakers. Sometimes it can actually implement changes.
Yeah.
Just if you want to talk a wee bit about that and just about the specific policy on autopsies, because I found that really interesting when we spoke about it before.
Yeah, before the law was, if you were a homicide victim and there were multiple accused, each accused, so say you were 4 accused for the homicide of one a victim, each accused is entitled to their own postmortem. And then you've got the prosecution postmortem as well. So that person would have been, getting a postmortem 5 times. And it's a pretty barbaric system. Families are already grieving under the worst possible circumstances. It's not a natural death. Quite often it's, they're young people. It's not natural. The thought that their relative is being cut up multiple times is just soul destroyer. So Kevin Woodburn was, quite firm that needed to change. So we campaigned for that, and eventually we got a protocol where there will only be 1 postmortem on a homicide victim unless there's, rare circumstances where it calls for more examination. But they are supposed to be 1 postmortem, and all the information is shared between all the relevant parties. And as far as we're aware, that is working really good. Another story many years ago, 2005, I was working at the Sunday Mail, and a 2-year-old boy had died from a methadone overdose. And at that point, he was Scotland's youngest drug victim. And we managed to get a change in the law of the way methadone was prescribed in Scotland, because back then, methadone could be taken home. And, people could take methadone at home. Now, it was Jack McConnell was the First Minister at the time, and he said, "No, we're going to change this. You now have to go to a prescribed, pharmacy to take your methadone." It might have relaxed now, don't know. But back then, we changed that law because of that little boy who had passed away. So,
You really see the power then in the entire process and your involvement in what's beyond the front page or what's beyond the sheet is really powerful.
Yeah, journalism can be a force for good, and I know it gets a lot of bad rep and a lot of people, hate it. But at the end of the day, you get people nowadays, they're sitting scrolling Facebook, and you've got content creators who are, they're not trained journalists, and they'll put out stuff that's not true.
Yeah.
Or is possibly going to wreck a case, and people are reading it and, oh my God, and looking at it and believing it. And then they read the newspaper and they think that we're cut from the same cloth, or we're not as, what's the word I'm looking for? they'll believe not a podcaster, but a content creator more than they would believe what they're reading in front of them in a national newspaper. And that's quite scary,
Yeah.
because you're getting a lot of unverified.
I'm just thinking of the people that, when that woman drowned, and the social media influencers who went to the same spot to do investigations themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And it completely conflicted with the police investigation. They actually went into areas they weren't allowed to go in, and trample potentially on evidence. So it's really damning.
Yeah, I mean,
Damning more angst.
the internet is great for some things, and we've got YouTube, we've got podcasting platforms, Instagram, all of these social media places. And what we've done is true crime's always been pretty big. And back in the day, it was book or maybe the odd documentary on TV. Now you've got podcasts, you've got videos, YouTube, you've got Netflix. Netflix has made it explode with the Making a Murderer generation. Every crime is now solvable. So what you've got now is armchair detectives and people who think they know the ins and outs of a case. And we saw it with Nicola Bulley. People descended on the scene. They all had, we all watched it. We all saw the theories that she had been abducted, she had been murdered. There was suspicion on her partner, her family. And, it was, I remember watching it unfold with absolute horror. In fact, I think I did a column on it on the Daily Record about the rise of the armchair detectives and how intrusive they actually can be when they think that they're being professional.
And I get the obsession with true crime, because a lot of my friends who like it, they say they almost use it in a very instructional way. When they hear about the worst case scenario, it's almost like they're schooling themselves and giving themselves a toolkit for how they would act in that situation. Yep. So I do understand it for that purpose.
I get it and I don't get it. And, I just...
People are acting and thinking with emotion rather than what's just.
Yep.
So we have to be dispassionate when we think about crime in a weird way, even though the main attraction to it is the emotional element.
It's a big bit of it for us for starting this podcast was the amount of sensationalism and misinformation that's out there, and people seem to give serial killers and people that have committed multiple crimes or serial crimes this pedestal of this being the main focus. And what I liked I've only got the book the other day there, so I'm not fully read, but what I liked about this is your dive straight into the focus on Tobin's victims as opposed to himself.
I was very clear when the concept for the book came up. I've been asked over the years, over the last 10 years, would you do a book on Peter Tobin? And I've always said no. Time never felt right. Didn't want to concentrate on him. And with this publisher, I've been very lucky in that they listened to the fact that I did not want it to be completely about him, because I've always felt that in a lot of these serial killing cases, and not just Peter Tobin, but in a lot of these cases, the victims become footnotes. And name of the podcast, footnotes in crime. So I do feel that, that I wanted the victims to be front and centre of that story. It couldn't be, we couldn't delve into all of their lives. This is got 3 known victims and many more suspected. And, we wanted it to be about him, but I was clear it cannot just be about him. I'm not glorifying him. It's not being written to dredge up pain for the family. But at the same time, we can't look away when these things happen, because looking away is how people like him thrive, and it's when we forget the mistakes that have been made, It's not to say there weren't mistakes made per se in Tobin, because he lived in an era where there's not a digital footprint. There wasn't a lot of CCTV cameras. You could just disappear with any name. People were still collecting their wages with a brown paper, a brown envelope on a Friday. Nowadays, the world's so different. You can't open a bank account, you can't get a house, you can't get a job. We've all got to be registered somewhere. And when he was in operation, he could just skip up and leave. You know, rent wasn't taken through your bank. You handed it to the rent collector would come to your door and take the money off you, or the landlord or whatever. So he was able to do what he did because he was able to just blend in without any real surveillance. You could move from one police area to another. We didn't have a lot of AMPR cameras, so, cars, just went through wherever, but now we're all tracked. If I was travelling from Edinburgh to Glasgow, I can bet you there's about 40 CCTV operators have watched my car go from A, B, C and D. It's not to say that I'm committing a crime, but, and they've got the ability to go back and look. Whereas, he could have a car on a Monday for 500 quid and get rid of it on the Friday without all the massive paperwork, I'm sure the V5 logs and that sort of thing. Plus, you didn't have interagency communication. Police Scotland maybe speak to the Met, or, even in Scotland, Lothian and Borders Police didn't speak to Strathclyde.
Yeah, before it became Police Scotland. Yeah.
Dumfries Gallery didn't speak to, Northern Constabulary. So, it's a lot more difficult for somebody like him to be in operation. That's not to say that it's impossible for a serial killer, but it makes it a lot more difficult. And then you factor in the advances in DNA technology that we've got now. There's very few murders go unsolved nowadays. And, he wasn't a planner. He didn't plan out his crimes. He was an opportunist. And he targeted vulnerable women. Hamilton was 15, sitting in a bus stop in Bathgate. Lost. Dark winter night. A man pulls up. He's got a baby seat in the back. Your automatic assumption would be, okay, he's got kids. And she's got in the car with him. Dinah McNichol got in a car with him, hitchhiking back from a music festival. She was with a friend. He got out. He asked her to get out the car. And she said, no, I'm just next stop's mine. And she's never seen again. And then, we've got Angelica, who brought Tobin into the public eye. And Angelica was a departure method for him because although he was an opportunist and he did a lot of his crimes spur of the moment, he had time with Vicky and with Dinah to do what he was going to do with them. With Angelica, they had a relationship prior to the murder, and they got on well. From what we know, they got on really well. She used to help him round, the church when she would do odd jobs with him. She would help him paint, and in that afternoon, the plan was that she would help him paint the garage. And he's seen an opportunity and he's taken it.
Yeah.
But then he's panicked because there was a good chance of discovery. And he's realised that. So he's put her body under the floorboards of the church and he's legged it.
What attracted you to writing about Peter Tobin in the first place?
Tobin's a story that's been with me virtually my whole career. Obviously he came to public eye in 2006. And I was there the day Angelica's body was discovered. And from that day on, I became the Peter Tobin reporter. Before he even went to trial, I had interviewed his third wife, his son. I had spoken to the second wife, interviewed her. We didn't run that story, and I talk about it in the book. Massive regret. I say it sits like a low note in this chapter because I didn't believe her. And this was before we knew everything about him. I'd gone to her door and she said, been expecting you. Expect me? She said, no, to any reporter. Ever since I've seen his name and his photo flashing up on the TV, I knew it would only be a matter of time before somebody came to my door. I was the first reporter to speak to her, and she told me this story, and I discuss it in great detail in the book, what she told me. And some of it just didn't seem believable. I'm not going to give spoilers but some of it just some of it just didn't seem believable, and it must have come across because then when I got out of the house, I felt sorry for her. I knew in essence, what she was telling me was true, because I'd already interviewed his third wife, and a similar story, but less violent, had come through from her. Whereas Margaret's story, there was a lot of violence involved, an awful lot of violence. And I phoned my boss. I phoned my boss at the Sunday Mail, and I told him what she'd told me. And there must have been a hesitation in my voice, because he said, "Do you believe her?" And I said, "No." And I don't know, I'd been a journalist at that point for, nearly a decade. So I wasn't inexperienced, but, Anyway, he said, "Let me speak to the bosses and I'll come back to you." And he came back to me and he said, "Nah, we're not going to run our story. It's unbelievable. Public won't go for it." And I tried again a couple of days later. I said, "Look, maybe she's embellishing it a wee bit, but, I do believe the things that she's saying." And he said, "Look, can we verify it?" And I said, "No, because she's already said she didn't ever go to the police." And, back in the 70s, the 60s, women didn't go to the police when they were being domestically abused by their husbands, because it was seen as, acceptable.
That's the thing about domestic abuse. It's that in this country anyway, it's that chart between a private matter and a public offence. And there was always going to be a bumpy ride to get from one part to the other. But yeah, I think even now it's still so hard.
Yeah. So, it's just, the book's quite frank. I tell the truth. I tell the truth about, I go into great detail about the interview with his wife, Kathy, the third wife, the son. It's not a memoir it's not about me. I do put some insight into it about what it was like to be a journalist at that, around that time, and the weight of what I was carrying and what I was working on, and I was probably, I was a lot younger then, so I was a lot more arrogant, if you want, and a lot more sort of, well, it's not happening to me.
I'm forever reading, and so's Katie. Whether that's exciting true crime titles or my favourite fiction series, I've usually got 3 or 4 books on the go at the one time. People ask me how I keep track of plot, structure and characters on different titles when I'm so busy. I balance physical reading with audiobooks. Audible is a great option for absorbing material on the go, with a massive range of titles available to listen to in the car, when I'm out on long walks, or when I'm busy cooking dinner. With the standard plan, subscribers have unlimited ad-free listening access to a select catalogue of Audible originals, plus nearly 200 titles previously available on Wondery Plus. While many of these titles will remain widely available, early access and ad-free listening are now available exclusively for Audible members. Amazon Prime customers receive 2 audiobooks in their trial. The plan is priced at a very reasonable £5.99 per month, with a 30-day free trial for listeners looking for the latest bestseller or who are just beginning to explore audiobooks. After 30 days, you can listen to 1 new book each month and continue to have unlimited access to the catalogue for just £5.99 a month with automatic renewal. You can cancel easily at any time. For more information or to sign up today, visit the link in the show notes or over at footnotesoncrime.com.
I am honest about it. And I'm honest, there's a chapter in the book called The Weight of Witness. And it's all about how over the last 30 years I've come to realise the mental and physical toll being first with those kinds of stories has had on me, and how it's had on other reporters, other colleagues. I've spoken before about PTSD, a little bit of that, but also, the weight of carrying what we get told on a daily basis, day in and day out, and how it isn't about us, but it's difficult to sit opposite somebody almost every day and listen to their pain and not have it affect you in some way.
Yeah, you carry it with you. And I think a couple of people that we've interviewed have mentioned that, whether they're a documentary maker or an FBI agent, they always say that every case, every story, there's still a little bit of it that lives within them forever.
Yeah, I mean, my own children and my grandchildren have suffered because of my job, because I'm very aware of what can go wrong and what can happen to people and the worst that humans do to each other. So, I've been probably a bit more stricter than most parents. I'm definitely, as I've got older, I've got more and more anxious. And I'm probably doubly anxious with the grandchildren because they're not my kids, So I'm probably more with them, but, and I worry more about them. And I don't know if that's just because I'm a lot older now, whereas, you've got the arrogance of youth. And I was a young mum. I was 17 when I had my daughter, 21 when I had my son. So, even when I was right in the thick of crime reporting, I was still relatively young. Now, I'm in my 50s. I'm a bit more, I don't know, cynical. And a bit more, and the anxiety comes from years and years and years of trauma and pain and knowing how bad human beings are.
How do you reconcile that? How do you sit that down? How do you put that away from you on just a day-to-day basis?
I'd like to say that, I sleep easy at night, but I don't, I don't sit there and think about everything. It's not something that comes into my head, now and again. I must have written hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of stories, and I can't possibly remember them all. But there are ones that stay with me. Tobin was one that stayed with me because I reported on him for 20 years, up until the day he died. I don't lie in my bed at night and go, and think about a story.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do sometimes is, it's really dark outside and there might be somebody hanging about outside and my brain starts going in other direction.
It's your central nervous system protecting you, I think.
Yeah, or, I'm driving along at night time and I'll see a female walking on her own. And again, my imagination goes into overdrive. Or I'm with the grandkids and I'll look at them and I'll, and then a flash of a story will come back to me involving a kid. And, and I can feel it. And sometimes I do get the physical symptoms, where I'm anxious or, reflux, and my GP will say, you're too anxious, you need to, but you've seen a lot, and how do you deal with that? Mm. And then, of course, silly me deals with death and destruction by training as a celebrant and then, conducting funerals. So I'm my own worst enemy at times.
I mean, your career, it's not just that you've seen things, you've experienced things, you've been on the receiving end of a lot of hate. You have received threats, your family have received threats. You've literally had a bow and arrow pointed in your direction. You've done all kinds of things. It's not just a passive thing, it's a very active role you've taken in facing these perpetrators. So I think it's very understandable that there's still lots of trauma attached to that. I mean, you've worked with the FBI, you've been searching for America's Most Wanted with them and assisting and consulting with them. These are not small things. So it makes sense that it also has a physical reaction and that rippling effect years later.
I think it goes back to, again, the arrogance of youth, because when I think on it now, I think to myself, if somebody pointed a crossbow at me right now, I think I would scream or faint or have a heart attack. But back then, I just shrugged it off. It was part of the job. And, maybe I had a few choice words to say about certain people that I'm not going to make public because of the podcast. But, and things that I got up to years ago, people chasing me in the street or, I've been attacked on doors. The crossbow incident happened at a certain Bay City roller manager's house. He's dead anyway, so it doesn't make any difference. But anyway, so, the gun in my head in Glasgow and these things, I don't know if I could shrug them off now. I think now they would be like a real problem for me. And I think that comes with age and, I'm too old to be running away now and I'm too old to be chased after. I couldn't run anyway. I can't run the length of myself anymore. So, but I think a lot of these things that happened to me, happened when I was a lot younger and a lot more equipped to deal with them. And, there's always the funny side of it as well. You do have the gallows humour, you know, where you have to laugh it off, or because if you don't, then you will have a nervous breakdown. I don't think the public realise that, you know, the things that a lot of journalists have to go through to bring them what they're reading over their cornflakes in the morning. You know, it's not just that now. When I was in the thick of journalism, maybe now it's slightly different, but when I was at the top of my game, you were out and about. It wasn't just a case of dictating words on a bit of paper. You know, you were actually doing legwork. You were researching. You were interviewing people. You were chasing criminals and confronting them. Yeah. Changing times now, you know, you don't, you know, digital. The young reporters are under pressure now to write 10 stories a day. There is no way on God's earth that they can be out and about, speaking to the public, meeting people, confronting people. So they're all doing it from behind a desk.
Is it a budget thing as well? Because I have heard that a lot of journalists just have to work off of PR releases. So they're working off a press release and they're not going out into their own beat and creating their own connections, actually discover what's going on in their community.
Oh, I mean, it's, well, we've already heard, you know, that a lot of media companies are using AI to write press releases.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, even if you're writing, you know, I don't know, simplest press release from Police Scotland, you know, something like there was a housebreak in Edinburgh. And, you know, it's no great journalism, right? But you've got a human touch behind it. You get AI to do it, and, you know, it comes across as mechanical because that's what it is. And then they're going to put AI working on bigger stories. I read a story, actually, before I came here this morning. It pitched up on my Facebook. And it was a US entertainment company was writing about an actor who's just died in America. And it was blatantly AI.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no emotion, there was no warmth, and it was probably half wrong. You know, if I'd bothered to even going back and research, it would have all been wrong. So you know, your young ones are not just battling a shrinking media. You know, people are not, they want their news like that. They want it quick because our attention spans are ridiculously low now. You know, my 7-year-old granddaughter, thankfully, is a massive reader, so she will sit and she will read a book. The 9-year-old has got the attention span of a gnat. If it's not TikTok, you know, style, quickness, she's not interested.
Where you're condensing a story so much to the point where it's just a second long, so you have no context, no nuance.
Yeah.
And if that's happening to a 9-year-old, it's happening to all adults as well, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We're all the same. Even I sometimes struggle to pick up a book now because my attention, you know, my phone's going constantly on, and it's quicker to just sit and do this and scroll on the phone. It's quite scary, you know, because journalism is all about truth to power, holding people to account. And if young journalists are sitting behind a computer screen, how are they going to do that? Where are the investigators of tomorrow?
Is that why you pivoted to writing books? Because you get to live in the world longer?
I always said I would never write a true crime book. Too much like a busman's holiday. And to me, it felt like just a bigger, longer form of journalism. And when I left the Record in 2022, I was fed up with journalism. I was knackered, burnt out, had enough. The last thing I wanted to do was write a book. But obviously, you know, my first true crime book after I left the Record was My Mother's Murder with Gina McGavin. And I was meant to be the ghostwriter on that, and the publisher wanted to put my name on the front. So, you know, I was front and centre with that one. And I did that because Gina had struggled with a self-published book years before, but also wanted to do it again, you know, do the story, update it, and wanted it written professionally. And I said yes to her because Gina and I had been in contact with each other for over 10 years since I'd first featured her mum's story. And right up until, you know, they eventually solved her mum's murder 35 years later, and we had a conviction. So that was my first true crime book, and I thought, I don't want to do another one. I don't like this. It's just like journalism, and I'm fed up with it. But I'm very lucky. I've got a great publisher and I've got a great publishing team. And they said, oh, you know, would you think about doing Peter Tobin? And I thought about it and I thought about it and I thought about it. And that the book is the end result. And I've got one more book to do for this publisher. It's not crime. I can't talk about it yet, but it's not crime.
That's what interests me, because your 3 books, you've got your book of short stories as well, is a totally different format again. How do you find moving between the different genres, and is your process the same, or is it very, very different for each?
So my first fiction book was a sort of anthology of short stories. And if I'm honest, there was no technique. I was really depressed after the record, really, really depressed. I was skint. And, you know, I'd given up a full-time job. My husband was, he's in a good job. But and when I say I was skint, I wasn't on the breadline, but I couldn't figure out how I was going to earn any money. And actually the thought of working as a journalist at that point made me feel quite unwell. I did eventually go back to, you know, freelancing a wee bit, but I took a long break. And I was sitting in my living room one night and my husband was up the stairs in a meeting at his work. And I was looking at the telly and I just thought, I'm so bored. I'm so bored. I feel like my brain cells are dying. And I got my laptop out and I wrote Wired for Sound, which was a story about a deaf girl. And I was writing from experience because there is something in my life that causes me stress every day, which is why I wrote Wired for Sound. And if you've read it, you'll know what it is. I wrote that and it just flowed. And then I found the next night I wrote another story. A week later I wrote another story and I put them on a Substack and people were reading them and going, oh, hey, that's really good. It's like, really? So I threw the book out on a wing and a prayer. It wasn't edited professionally. I didn't change any of it. I just threw it out there and it became an Amazon bestseller, which I was like, how? And I was like, I wanted, you know, so I started to do a novel. And then while I was writing the novel, I was asked to do My Mother's Murder. So I parked the novel and I did My Mother's Murder. And I planned to go back to the novel. And then I was asked to do a Tobin book. So I haven't written any fiction. I've started again. Sometimes, not every day, but sometimes I'm adding to the novel. And people could say, when's it coming? And it was supposed to be coming March 2024, nearly into March 2026, and it's not. But I've been busy, and so I've not really been writing any fiction. I'm writing the Tobin book and My Mother's Murder, and the next book is just, I just write what I think. I'm not a plotter. I'm not a planner. The Tobin book was easy because I knew most of it anyway, and it's my own personal recollections. And also, you know, I was very much aware of the legal story and what, you know, Operation Anagram, how they got them and how they found the bodies and stuff. So a lot of that book was, you know, there was minimal research because I knew a lot of it anyway.
Let's take a wee break from the case. Before we get back to it, a quick question. How do we record footnotes on crime from different locations without using a single detail? Because in this podcast, details matter a lot. That's why we use Riverside FM. It records studio quality audio and video locally on each person's device, so even if the internet cuts out, your recording doesn't. No glitches, no robotic voices, no lost evidence. And when you're telling stories where every word counts, that reliability is everything. Plus, Riverside makes the whole process simple. Separate tracks, high-resolution video when you use it, automatic uploads, it's all there, ready when you are. Whether you're recording a podcast, an interview, or something bigger, it just works. As an aside to the podcast, I also use it for interviews with clients and creation of high-quality clips for their social media channels. The uses for Riverside are really endless. So if you're serious about your content and want it to sound as sharp as it should, head to riverside.fm and start recording today. The link to sign up is in the show notes and at footnotesoncrime.com.
Are you straight to paper, or are you a laptop kind of person?
Laptop. Although, as a child, and when I wrote stories, it was pen and paper, obviously, because there's no such thing as laptops or internet. And then as an adult, I kept a diary, and I've always, written little diaries. And then I stopped for years and years and years. And 2026 is the year of journaling, and I am doing it. I've got 3 journals on the go. Stickers and everything, and oh my goodness, it's I've picked up Donna Ashworth's journaling book as well, Journal With Me, and it's like a big tome. I'm trying to do more of that, because I do think writing true crime is really easy for me.
It reads like fiction. Your writing is so
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm just
Yeah, I want to try and, expand on how I write, change my style. I've had to change my style, obviously, for the 3 books that I've done. If you were to put them all side by side, you would that's 3 different writers, because they're all very, very different in tone, subject matter. My Mother's Murder wasn't my voice, it was Dina. I'm not even sure Tobin's my voice either, because I wanted to make it about the victims. I suppose it is. It's a mixture of everything. And the fiction book is all me, but the unedited me, the one that doesn't think about what she's writing or what she's saying. I just, spewed it out, if you like. And it was indicative of how I was feeling at the time. When I went back to look at my fiction book that I started the same year, I thought, oh my God, it's really dark again, but not as dark. So I think the success of the first book sort of gave me a bit of a lift. So when I came to write the novel, it's still dark, but it's not as dark, and it's probably a bit more entertaining. Whereas with the short story, I was scratching some itches, I was exorcising some ghosts, and just, trying to work out in my own head how depressed I was, and how, it was a really dark time for me, because I'd just left a job that I used to love, but had started to hate in the last couple of years. And that was purely because of abuse that I was getting because of social media. It did take me to a really horrible place. It was quite a sad ending, actually, for the career that I'd had all these years, to suddenly feel as if, I could have just walked away with it, a backward glance. And I virtually did do that.
That's interesting, because a lot of the writers and filmmakers that we interview, we have this notion of catharsis, don't we? About creating something. But actually it's a lot more complicated. When you're creating something through a bad time, catharsis is almost too easy, like a word to apply to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was, writing that short story book really did help, it was like therapy, because I was able to get out all of those dark feelings that I was experiencing at that point. I wasn't a nice person to be around at that point. I was miserable, I was upset. I felt aggrieved that, because I had disagreed with some people, that I deserved to get rape threats. My grandchildren were threatened with, sexual abuse. People were, slurring my whole career because I didn't agree with what their opinion was on a certain subject. They were slurring my family, saying that, my family were all criminal, which couldn't be any further from the truth. And then I had, it was just awful, and that dumbing down on basically said that I was a prostitute. It was horrific. It was when you're coming under that onslaught, singly and individually, it's water off a duck's back. But when it's relentless, and it was relentless for 18 months, day in, day out, I would open up my social media and somebody would be saying something, or friends would send me screenshots of things that certain people were saying about me, and I was like, but that's not true. That's not, what on earth? But people would believe it. That I was unqualified to be a journalist, that I was a failure.
Comes back to that snowball again, like people putting it out there and not knowing the facts and just spuriously saying things.
Purely for the pure and simple fact that I believed that the right person was in prison for a murder, and they didn't. And, disagreement is fine. Disagree with me. And my job at that time was not just as daily record crime reporter, but I was also their columnist. So I had a crime column. And because that was my job, was to give my opinion on certain things to do with crime. And I did give my opinion, and I stand by my opinion, and I still stand by it today. But I didn't deserve what they were dishing out because I didn't agree with them. Why did it matter to them so much that I agree? Because, who am I? In the grand scheme of things, who am I? I'm nobody. I was a journalist in a national newspaper, but they had so many other supporters. Why were they fixated on what I thought and what I said? And there was also awful accusations that I had somehow been responsible for this man being put in prison.
Something like that.
That was horrific. And any sane person would know that I was the crime reporter of the Edinburgh Evening News when the murder happened. But I wasn't in the country when the girl was murdered. I was in the Caribbean. And when I came back, another reporter was already working on it. And I maybe did one or two stories. I did the funeral of the girl. I was there that day. And then I went to the Sunday Mail, and I didn't work on it again until after the trial. And my only involvement was one of the murder victim's best friends paying tribute to her. That was the extent of it. But these people were telling everybody that I had colluded with the police, I was corrupt, I had, planted evidence to get them found guilty. It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. And I felt like during that 18 months, I just felt like my whole life had imploded. It was seeping into everything. I would be having conversations with my boss and I was snapping. I was getting angry. He was getting frustrated because this, it wasn't me, but it was affecting me really badly. Mentally, it was horrific. I was worried about, am I going to be going to the shops and somebody's going to attack me? Or somebody going to attack me in front of the children? Are they going to find out where I live? Am I going to wake up one day and, my car's got paint over it or whatever? That. It was horrible. It was awful. And as a woman, I felt vulnerable. And probably for the first time in 30 years of crime journalism, I felt extremely vulnerable. I didn't feel vulnerable like that when I had a gun to my head. I didn't feel vulnerable when I had the crossbow at my chest. I didn't even feel vulnerable like that the day a guy battered me on a front door. But during that whole 18-month period with the online abuse, I felt really like, my life has just fallen a bit. And I'd been under online abuse in 2016 over a football story. And as horrific as that was, it didn't seem the people were not as ferocious or personal as the 2022-21 mob. It was horrific.
So I'm going to put a question to you that we ask everyone. How do we survive? But how did you survive that period, that 18 months of hell? Everything you've already been through, that culmination of trauma anyway, but how did you survive those 18 months?
It wasn't easy. On those first few months after I left the record, I actually felt as if I was losing my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I was going through some health challenges at that point. Horrible health challenges. And I'm a firm believer that stress manifests physically. And so, you know, I had gone to the GP for something that I thought was innocuous and ended up being quite serious. And I felt as if that was a direct result of all the stress that I'd been under. So the first few months were really, really hard. Now, with the benefit of hindsight and looking back on it, they've all quietened down, they've all disappeared. I don't look. I've told people, don't tell me. If you see something bad about me on the internet, don't tell me. I don't want to know. It's none of my business what people think about me. And, you know, and I've taught myself to think like that. You know, if somebody doesn't like me, there's nothing I can do about it. They're never going to like me. If somebody's got an opinion about me or they want to make up stories, you know, it's fun. It's funny because sometimes I look at these celebrities and I see all these celebrity stories about people, and I'm not interested. I'm not that type of person. I don't read gossip or for a reporter. You know, I'm probably the least nosy person on the planet, believe it or not. I was starting to get a little bit of a flavour of how they felt, because, you know, how they cope with it. You know, how do they cope with people coming out with batshit stuff about them?
Mm-hmm.
And they know it's not true. And I was seeing all these things about me that weren't true. So now I don't look. I don't look for it. I tell people, don't tell me anything. You know, don't try and defend me. Just ignore. You know, it's the easiest way, because I don't want my mental health to be affected because you feel the need to tell me that somebody said something horrible about me.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a long time to realise that when people thought they were being helpful by telling me the stuff, what was being written about me on Twitter or Facebook or on blogs, there was a couple of them, you know, wrote blogs about me, which were all this nonsense. In fact, one of them actually put an apology on Twitter, but she didn't blog about the apology. Oh, we realised that Jane Hamilton wasn't as involved in this story as we thought she was, so I apologise. Excuse me, but you already wrote a blog 2 years ago absolutely ripping me to shreds.
Mm-hmm.
But your apology's not on your blog, it's on Twitter. I mean, nobody sees it nowadays, you know. So anyway, get back to your original question. How do you deal with it? Now I'm just chalking it up to experience. I have to. I can't let it define me. And I can't, you know, I've had a good career, and it felt like a shame when I left the record not under a cloud because I'd done anything wrong, but under a cloud because I felt like I just need to get out.
Mm-hmm.
I need to get away. And I've since worked, you know, with the record many times since then. But that love that I used to have for journalism has never come back. And now...
That's interesting.
Yeah. It just, you know, it was just like one day I woke up and I thought, I'm not liking this anymore. I'm getting too old now to be putting up with all this nonsense. We used to just be names in the paper, a byline that nobody read, or names that meant nothing. Now you've got to have a public profile, you've got to, you know, and with social media, it's like everything's a village now, and everybody's got an opinion. And people don't seem to care what they're writing about people, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they forget that, you know, those bylines, these people behind that byline are human beings. So now, you know, I've never ever got back to feeling like that buzz for news, or I want to be in the thick of a story. I talk about it in the book where I talk about the day I got the phone call that Peter Tobin had died. No spoilers, but it's indicative of how I feel about the job now, and I do go into it. The world didn't stop turning just because I stopped being a journalist. If somebody had said to me 15 years ago, you're not going to be a journalist anymore, I would have thought the world had ended. And that was it, because being a journalist, it flowed through my blood. News wasn't what woke me up in the morning.
So you don't love journalism, but do you love writing books? Or is that too strong a word?
Yeah, I mean, I do like writing. I want to get back to fiction. I love working with the publishers, Mirror Books. They're absolutely, it's an amazing team. They're very supportive. All the horror stories that I'd heard about publishers is, not true with this company. And they're a fantastic team, and we do work as a team because books don't happen on their own. I might write it, but it takes an army to get it into a bookshop. And authors just can't do that job without them. Unless you're like me and you throw your book out on Amazon on a wing and a prayer. But, when it's books like that, and, I've been very lucky, but I want to get back to fiction, but I don't want a publisher.
You self-publish?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to ask that question as well, the self-publishing journey versus traditional publishing. The way some people look on it is very different. I've seen people use it from a monetary point of view, looking at it from the financial side of things, is they obviously don't need to put up as much to of a percentage of the book sales. But the support that you were talking about wouldn't be there. So what would you say? So you want to focus on the self-publishing thing for your fiction?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there used to be a lot of snobbery surrounding self-published people. People that, you can't be any good, you've not got a publisher. But, I'm like, no, I want to self-publish because I want to be in control of my own work. But also, I'm too thin-skinned to listen to some editor telling me it's crap, I'm just like, I'll let the buying public decide whether it's crap or not.
Would you edit it yourself then, fully?
I think for the next novel, I'll get a professional editor. I can just about cope with that, polish it up and, but I will have because I want to put out the best product that I can. Now that I've learned a lot more about the book industry and the publishing industry, I do want to, the book's still there. Tell Me a Story, it's still out there. It's still selling on Amazon. And it's great. And I'm not going to touch it because I want it to be authentic. I like to think of myself as an authentic person. And I hope that when people read that book, the Tobin book, they'll see not just someone who, as the public think of reporters sell their granny for a story. I would hope that they'll see us as human beings and remember that when they're sitting on Facebook or Twitter crucifying a young journalist, that, it's a human being at the back of that. And, would they like it done to their kids? Would they like it done to somebody in their family? If the answer's no, you might not agree with the story. Put your hand up and walk away from your computer. Think about what you're going to write and then go back and do it. And it's the same with these people that, laugh and glorify about the demise of newspapers. We all know newspapers are struggling to catch up with it, the world today, because people want their news on the they want it on the telly, they want it on their phones. The tide is turning slowly. People are going back to long-form journalism again, but a lot of the decline and the damage has been done. If you're sitting on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram and you're cheering about people losing their job, go and have a think about it. And purely because, they either don't believe what's written in the paper, they don't agree with it, or it's a football affiliation or politics.
Yeah, it's incredibly lazy in news Thursday, isn't it?
It's sad in a lot of ways as well, because like you say, the press hold our politicians to account, they hold the people in power to account, they speak to power and challenge when other people can't.
Yeah.
And if we lose that, it's just going to be an echo chamber.
Oh yeah, I mean, look at X or whatever they call it now. It is just an echo chamber. And you've got the President of the United States doing what he does on social media. Could you imagine if there was no accountability whatsoever? We're already seeing a lot of that in the States just now. And could you imagine what it would be like if it happened here,
Only 5 minutes behind.
Yeah.
We're so polarised in everything. Our politics, everything is just polarised. And, the world does seem like a pretty grim place at the minute. So then, of course, I go ahead and I write in a grim book. So
I honestly don't think it's grim. I think it's an excellent way to tell the story through the eyes of the people that it's affected, including yourself. That's the important bit as well. But I get what you're saying about the world, but I think if you peek through the cracks, you can see there are cracks in all this and all of these bad stories that we're hearing. And you read one bad story and the algorithms on the social media channel throw more bad stories at you, throw more negativity at you. And I think if we put out there the stories of the survivors, we put out there the stories of the people that have been through experiences, whether directly themselves or whether as a reporter, we've the opportunity to change a lot of people's perspectives.
yeah,
And change the algorithm and change the story back kind of in the direction that it should be going, that there's hope, there's progress and hope, because I think that's a massive bit of what's missing everywhere.
yeah.
To circle back to one of your earliest points, actually, it's about making meaning.
Yeah.
You talked about changing policy.
Yeah.
And that's what can happen. We can actually make the world a better place.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
I think that's a lovely bit to end on. Thank you so much for coming in to chat.
Thanks very much for having me.
Really enjoyed it.
That's all from this episode of Footnotes on Crime. A massive thank you to Jane for taking the time to chat to us about her writing, her career in journalism, and for being so open and honest about some of the struggles she's faced. Links to purchase Jane's books in various formats are available in the show notes and on the Footnotes website. By purchasing using these links, you'll also be supporting the podcast and allowing us to continue on our journey with other amazing guests just like Jane. For more information on Jane, please visit footnotesoncrime.com, where you can find clips from all our episodes and a place to sign up to the Footnotes newsletter to hear more about the phenomenal guests we have coming up for all our footprints. Sources of support are also available on the website for anyone who needs them. Coming up on episode 7, Tom Wood, one of Scotland's most senior and experienced police officers, now retired, and author of The World's End Murders, The Inside Story, and Ruxton, The First Modern Murder.
People say to me often, why don't you write crime fiction? I say, why would I have to? Truth is strange. Truth is stranger than fiction. Every time. Why would I have to do that? I don't glorify violent crime, and I only put in information that's salient to the story. So I don't like gratuitous violence. I don't write about violent people. To be part of a murder team that investigates the murder of a person, the death of a person, is two things. First, it's the highest compliment you can be paid, professional compliment can be paid, because it's very clear that that's the very apex of policing.
Thank you for listening, and remember to like and subscribe to Footnotes on Crime wherever you listen to podcasts.
Footnotes linger. Every end's a start, every line is sign.